Hello and welcome to this instructional video on the major stances found in Tae Kwon Do. Now we're going to start with a walking stance. It is probably the most common stance in Tae Kwon Do, probably the most used stance in Tae Kwon Do. So it is imperative you get it right from the start as a white belt, because if you don't, you're going to struggle to progress because those foundations won't be there. Now, a lot of stances in Tae Kwon Do are measured in terms of your shoulder width. So it's always personal to the person who's doing it. One person might have very broad shoulders, one person might have very narrow shoulders, but it doesn't matter. Those stances will be different slightly for those people because it's based on the person itself. So with that in mind, this is my shoulder width here, and for a walking stance, your feet are a shoulder width apart. So in terms of length, it is a shoulder and a half width in length. So if I do this and make it a very kind of square stance, it's not quite long enough. I have to take it that little bit extra forward to give myself a better foundation. My front toes are facing right forwards. My back foot, however, is not, because if I point my toes right forwards like that, it almost bends the knee inwards and it feels very uncomfortable and you don't have a solid foundation. You're quite off balance. So your back foot goes out to about 25 degrees. If you go any further than that, you then lose shape and integrity of the stance. So it's at about 25-degree angle at the back, again still maintaining that shoulder width. Your front knee is slightly bent. If you bend it, make sure you can just see your toes over the top of your knee. If you can't see your toes at all, you've overbent it. If you can see your whole foot, you haven't bent it enough. So your toes should be just jutting out the knee right there. Your back knee is dead straight, so that's a dead straight leg back there. One more thing to note, your shoulders themselves should be, as we refer to it, square. You're not sideways on like this, okay? If you're sideways on, what it probably means is that your stance is too narrow. So when you widen that stance and your feet are both facing forwards, one straight forwards, the other at that 25-degree angle, your square shoulders should be in there. Facing that camera, facing you guys right there with my shoulders. As I say, that is pretty much your walking stance in there. It's a 50-50 weight distribution on both legs. I'm not leaning more weight forwards or backwards. It's 50-50 in there. It's a nice, solid stance to be going on with. So as I come forwards, that's staying in there like so, okay? So that's your walking stance in there. If I show you one more time from a sideways on view. So I've got my shoulder width in there, my shoulder and a half width in length. My toes now facing dead towards that wall, my back foot on a 25-degree angle, slightly bent front knee, shoulders square, and that is my walking stance in there. So now that we've got that, we're going to move on to the L stance. So the L stance then, it is the main one in what I refer to as the L family of stances, which I'll move through as the video goes on. So the L stance itself, well, in comparison to the walking stance, it's the same length. It's 1.5 shoulder widths in length. However, it's not a shoulder width apart. In fact, your feet should be near enough, the heels almost in line there. And that is what creates the L shape, hence the name. This looks like a capital L in there. As for weight distribution, this is one of the very, very few stances that isn't 50-50. Instead, I've got about 70% of my weight on the back leg and only 30% on my front leg, okay? So my back knee should be far more bent than my front knee in there. So I've got my front foot facing dead forward, my back foot facing out on that 90-degree angle off to the side over there. They're very, very nearly in line, and I've got more weight on my back leg than I do on my front leg, to the ratio of 70-30. Now the main point of an L stance is to either lift this lead leg in case someone tries to sweep it, and because most of my weight is on the back leg, I can easily just lift it without overbalancing. Or in a more offensive situation, I can lift it and do a quick kick in there like so. So either way, it's about being able to transfer my weight fully onto the back leg without overbalancing, whether that's to perform a kick or to avoid a sweep. So the L stance is fairly simple in there. It is, again, one of the most common stances, and I find that it's what a lot of people do, even when they're trying to first learn a walking stance. People feel a bit more comfortable sort of doing that, and they end up in very much almost an L shape in there when coming forwards, because they haven't quite got that back foot down. Yeah? So make sure that L stance, again, is the same length as a walking, but in a more compressed width in there. Okay? So that's your L stance. I'm not shoulder square this time. Again, that makes it very comfortable. So I am a bit more sideways on this time with that L stance. And also, like I say, this is the first in a family of stances that all use a very, very similar shape. So next one we'll go on to is the fixed stance. So the fixed stance then, it's very, very similar to an L stance, but if my L stance is about here, my fixed is here. It's a little bit longer. It can go from a shoulder and a half to about double shoulder width apart. So it's the widest stance we've done yet. And the other difference is that instead of the weight distribution being mainly towards the back, it returns like walking stance to 50-50, and both knees bend evenly. So I've got my fixed stance in here. My front foot is facing forwards, and again, my back foot is on that 90-degree angle towards that wall over there. So it still maintains that L shape, but it's a little bit longer, and you now have even weight distribution in here, which gives you a more solid base to actually stand in, as opposed to here, which was more about trying to lift the foot. We're not trying to do that this time. So we have, again, more of our weight evenly distributed. So if I show you both an L stance and a fixed stance sideways on. So my L is here with a straighter front leg and a more bent back leg in there. And it's about a shoulder and a half width in length. I'm going to make it slightly longer and then bend both knees. And that there is my fixed stance going in there. So it's those subtle differences between the two. And while I'm on the subject of the fixed stance, which is the second of what I refer to as the L family, I'm also going to go on to the sitting stance, because there's basically one difference. I'm just going to turn that foot there. So now you can see with my sitting stance, I'm dead straight in there. So if I line myself a bit more with the camera. So as you can see, my sitting stance, it's again about a shoulder and a half to double shoulder width apart, both knees bent, 50-50, and that's your sitting stance in there, as if you're sat on a horse. Yeah? So my sitting is here, and a fixed stance is a sitting stance, but in an L shape. Yeah? That's the only real difference between sitting and fixed stance in there. Why would you use different ones? Well, the fixed is if I'm sort of going in that direction over there, and the sitting is if I want to sit but then face right forwards. So that's the main difference in there. So you've got your sitting stance and your fixed stance in there as well. And both L and fixed are part of the L family. We're going to move on to the next member of the L family now, which is bringing it back the other way, the vertical stance. So for the vertical stance, it's again in a very similar shape. You've got your L here, you've got your fixed here, but the vertical, if this is your L, is actually a tiny bit shorter. So now you're only looking at a single shoulder width, okay, between the heels. Single shoulder width in there. It isn't quite 50-50 on both legs. It's about 60 on the back, 40 on the front. So there's a slight difference there, okay, but not as pronounced as the L. It's about 60 back and 40 front, but your legs are pretty much straight. Okay, so you've got straight legs into there. Now this isn't a stance that's as commonly used as the other two, but you do use it on occasion. So you've got your vertical stance in there. And finally as well, the final member of the L family, as I refer to it, is your rear foot stance as well. So again, you've got that basic L shape, but now you're just going to lift up onto the ball of your foot at the front there. Okay, and again, this isn't used so often, but it is used, for example, in pattern Jung Gun, where you've come up into here with your upwards palm block in there. So that's your rear foot stance. Most of your weight is now on the back leg, okay? Vast majority of it, because now you're on the ball of that front foot, it can't support as much weight. So most of your weight for the rear foot stance, hence the name, goes onto the rear foot. So if I was to go over the four major stances that make up the L family, as I refer to it as, because they all make that L shape with your feet. So you've got your rear foot stance, which is very, very short. Most of your weight is on the rear leg, whilst the front leg sees you on the ball of your foot in there. Hence why most of your weight is on the rear leg in here. Then you've got vertical stance, where again, most of the weight is on the rear leg, but it's only 60-40. So the difference isn't as pronounced. So it's quite an upright kind of stance with a little bit more weight on the back leg. It's still making that L shape, about a shoulder width apart. Then you take it to shoulder and a half width for your L stance in there. The difference in weight distribution is a bit more pronounced, 70 on the back leg and 30% on the front leg, so you can easily avoid a sweep or throw a kick in there. Both knees will be bent, but the back leg will be bent a lot more. So there's your L stance, and then finally the fixed stance, and that's your pretty much double shoulder width apart in there, both knees bent, but still making that same L shape, and then it's a bit more planted into the ground. So you're sitting down in it that little bit more. So one more time, going back up through, you've got fixed stance in here. You've got L stance in here, like so. You've got vertical stance in here, much more upright. It's called vertical, so you're much more upright with it. And then finally, rear foot stance in there too, on the ball of your foot at the front. So those are the major stances that make up what I refer to as the L family. Now the last stance that we're going to go over is your parallel ready stance, which is of course what you start a lot of stuff with, whether it's traditional line work, in your set sparring, patterns. There's lots of things that use the parallel ready stance. So, as the name suggests, your feet do go parallel to start off with. So they're both facing forwards in exactly the same way. Think of a railway line, or even these lines that make up the mats on our floor. If you go in straight lines, they're never going to meet. They're not crossing over like this, or they're going to meet, or even go away from each other. So my feet are like that, my feet are like that. Both feet face absolutely forward. Shoulder width apart, and then in addition, your hands as well. So your hands, I mean, they don't just dangle lamely like this, okay? I see a lot of people there, they sort of do that, and they keep their arms very straight. It's not dead straight with the arms. There's a slight bend in the elbows there. So when I was to go, if someone were to tell me at the start of Chonji, and they say Chunbi, in there, you can see there's slight bend in my arm. I'm stood up nice and straight, shoulders square with my feet facing forwards in there. And that's such an important one to know because it's how so much of Taekwondo begins, particularly the traditional side of it. So you've got your parallel ready stance in here. That just about covers it for all the major stances. There are of course lots of other stances in Taekwondo, not as well used, and you'll learn them as you progress up through the higher belt. But for now, that's most of the major stances. So thank you for watching. Please keep an eye out for other videos that will help you in your training. Take care, and I'll see you on the mat soon.